The old iron bridge creaked under the weight of passing cars, its rusted beams groaning with each vibration. Beneath it, a small cardboard box sat abandoned near the edge. Inside, a tiny German shepherd puppy whined softly, his big paws pushing against the sides as he tried to escape. His golden-brown fur was matted with dirt, and his ribs showed through his skin. He hadn't eaten in days. With one clumsy movement, the puppy tumbled out of the box and over the edge of the bridge. His small body plummeted toward the rocky riverbank below. A sharp yelp escaped him as he hit the ground, rolling painfully before coming to a stop. Dazed and shaking, he tried to stand, but his back leg gave out. A whimper rose in his throat as he looked around, alone and hurt. Then, footsteps, fast and heavy. A man in a worn leather jacket was running toward him, his breath ragged. He had seen the fall from his truck parked nearby. Without hesitation, he dropped to his knees beside the puppy, gently checking his injuries. The pup flinched but didn't growl. There was something about this man's rough hands that felt safe. "Easy, boy. I got you," the man murmured, carefully lifting the trembling pup. The puppy's leg hung limp, and his breathing was shallow. The man's jaw tightened as he hurried back to his truck, holding the pup close. "You're gonna be okay," he whispered, but his voice wavered. Who was this stranger? Why was he the only one who stopped? And with that injured leg, did the puppy even have a chance? The truck's engine roared to life as the man carefully cradled the injured puppy against his chest with one arm while steering with the other. The puppy's shallow breaths came in quick, panicked bursts, his small body trembling uncontrollably from both pain and shock. The man kept glancing down at him, his rough fingers gently stroking the matted fur in what he hoped was a soothing motion. "Just hang on, little soldier," he murmured, his voice gruff but surprisingly tender. The road stretched endlessly before them, the headlights cutting through the gathering darkness as they sped toward the nearest town. As they drove, the puppy's golden brown eyes fluttered open briefly, meeting the man's gaze for a fleeting moment before closing again. There was something hauntingly familiar about those eyes, deep, intelligent, and filled with unspoken trust despite the pain. The man felt an unexpected tightness in his chest, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself in years. He shook his head slightly, trying to dismiss the thought. He didn't do attachments, not anymore, not since. A sudden, sharp whimper from the puppy snapped him back to reality. The little leg was definitely broken, maybe worse. The man pressed down harder on the accelerator, his knuckles whitening around the steering wheel. He knew time was running out. The nearest vet clinic was still 20 minutes away, and the puppy was growing weaker by the second. His mind raced with memories he had long buried, flashes of another German shepherd, another life, another time when he had failed to save someone he loved. The truck swerved slightly as he took a sharp turn, the tires kicking up gravel. The puppy let out a small, pained yelp at the sudden movement, and the man immediately eased his foot off the gas, murmuring another apology. He couldn't afford to lose control now, not when this little life depended on him. Then, just as the town's dim lights appeared in the distance, the truck sputtered. The man's heart dropped as the engine coughed ominously before giving one last shuddering groan. "No, no, no!" He slammed his palm against the dashboard as the vehicle rolled to a stop on the side of the deserted road. The fuel gauge blinked empty. He cursed under his breath, his mind scrambling for a solution. They were still at least 5 miles out. The puppy's breathing had grown even more labored, his small body growing still. Panic clawed at the man's throat. He couldn't let this happen again. Not like last time. Without hesitation, he unbuckled his seatbelt and carefully gathered the puppy into his arms, cradling him against his chest. Then, he kicked the truck door open and stepped out into the cold night air. He would run if he had to. The man took off at a steady jog, his boots pounding against the asphalt. Every few steps he glanced down to make sure the puppy was still breathing. The little body felt frighteningly fragile in his arms, but he refused to slow down. The wind bit at his face, but he barely noticed. His entire focus was on the weight in his arms, on the shallow rise and fall of the puppy's chest. Then, in the distance, headlights appeared. A car was approaching. The man's pulse spiked. Was it help? Or just another passerby who wouldn't care? He stepped into the middle of the road, waving his free arm wildly. The car slowed, then stopped. The window rolled down, revealing a middle-aged woman with worried eyes. "Oh my God, is that dog okay?" she asked immediately. The man didn't waste time with explanations. "He's hurt bad. I need to get him to a vet, now." The woman didn't hesitate. "Get in." As the man climbed into the passenger seat, still clutching the puppy close, the car peeled back onto the road, speeding toward town. The woman kept stealing glances at them, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "What happened to him?" she asked softly. The man's jaw tightened. "He fell from the bridge," was all he said. But there was so much more to it than that, and the truth was coming. The vet clinic's fluorescent lights burned bright against the night as the man burst through the doors, the puppy's limp body cradled protectively against his chest. A young receptionist looked up in alarm, her eyes widening at the sight of the blood matting the puppy's golden fur. "We need help, now!" the man barked, his voice rough with urgency. Without waiting for a response, he pushed past her toward the treatment area, his boots leaving wet prints on the tile floor. A gray-haired vet in a white coat emerged from a back room, his sharp eyes immediately assessing the situation. "Put him here," the vet ordered, gesturing to an examination table. The man gently laid the puppy down, his large hands hovering uncertainly as the vet began his examination. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and fear, a scent the man knew all too well. His pulse hammered in his throat as he watched the vet's practiced fingers probe the puppy's injured leg. The little creature whimpered, weakly, his tail giving a single feeble thump against the metal table. "He's in shock," the vet muttered, grabbing a stethoscope. "Broken hind leg, possible internal injuries. We need to stabilize him immediately." A technician rushed in with an IV bag, her movements quick and efficient. The man took a step back, suddenly feeling like an intruder in this sterile world of medicine. His clothes were still damp from the river, his hair a wild mess. He ran a shaky hand through it, trying to steady his breathing. He shouldn't be here. He shouldn't care this much. But those golden eyes, God, those eyes, they held him rooted to the spot. The vet glanced up at him. "You, his owner?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. The man opened his mouth, then closed it. What was he supposed to say? That he'd found this puppy broken and abandoned? That something in those familiar eyes had called to a part of him he thought long dead? Before he could answer, the vet continued, "We'll need to take x-rays. There could be spinal damage." He turned to the technician. "Prepare for surgery." Surgery. The word sent a cold spike of fear through the man's chest. He'd seen enough surgeries in his time to know how quickly things could go wrong. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Will he—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The vet didn't sugarcoat it. "It's touch and go. He's lost a lot of blood, and he's severely dehydrated." The older man's gaze sharpened as he looked at the stranger properly for the first time. "You're military, aren't you?" The question caught him off guard. His posture straightened automatically, shoulders squaring. Old habits died hard. Former, he admitted gruffly, Marines. The vet nodded as if something had just clicked into place. He reached into the puppy's mouth, gently prying it open. Then he froze. His eyes snapped up to meet the man's. This dog is microchipped. The air left the man's lungs in a rush. Microchipped. That meant an owner. That meant this wasn't some stray. This puppy belonged to someone. The vet was already moving toward a scanner, but the man couldn't tear his eyes away from the small, shivering form on the table. If this dog had an owner, why was he abandoned on that bridge? Why was he left to die? The scanner beeped. The vet's face went pale. "Oh my God," he whispered. "What?" The man stepped forward, his heart pounding. "What is it?" The vet turned the screen toward him, and the world tilted on its axis. There, blinking back at him from the display, was a name he hadn't heard in years. A name that belonged to a ghost. A name that couldn't be connected to this puppy. Because that name was his wife's. His dead wife's. The vet's words echoed in the sterile air like a gunshot, freezing the man where he stood. His hands began shaking uncontrollably as he stared at the screen, his vision tunneling until all he could see was that name, her name, blinking back at him in cold, digital letters. The walls of the clinic seemed to press in around him, the antiseptic smell suddenly overwhelming. His knees threatened to buckle as 5 years of carefully constructed walls came crashing down in an instant. "That's impossible," he choked out, his voice barely recognizable even to himself. The vet was saying something about the microchip registration, dates, last known address, but the words blurred together into meaningless noise. All he could focus on was the tiny, struggling puppy on the table, whose golden eyes held the same heartbreaking intelligence as another German shepherd he'd known long ago. Memories assaulted him. Sarah laughing as their first German shepherd, Rex, bounded through autumn leaves. Sarah's tear-streaked face the day Rex didn't come home from his final military deployment. Sarah whispering, "We'll get another one someday," as they buried an empty collar beneath the old oak tree. That someday never came. 6 months later, the roadside bomb took Sarah too, leaving him alone with nothing but his guilt and 2 graves to tend. He'd sworn never to love another living thing again. Yet here he stood, his calloused fingers itching to stroke this puppy's head, his traitorous heart already bound to this broken creature in ways he couldn't begin to understand. The vet's hand on his shoulder snapped him back to the present. "Sir, did you hear me? This chip was registered to Sarah Calloway 3 months ago." 3 months? The timeline punched him in the gut. Sarah had been gone 5 years. The math didn't make sense. Unless... His mind raced through possibilities, each more painful than the last. Could someone have stolen her identity? Was this some cruel joke? The puppy chose that moment to let out a weak whimper, his little body convulsing slightly as the vet administered pain medication. Without thinking, the man reached out, his battle-rough fingers gently stroking the velvety space between the puppy's ears. The moment his skin made contact, the puppy stilled, a shuddering sigh escaping his tiny chest, as if he'd been waiting for this touch his entire short life. Then the vet dropped the second bombshell. There's something else. He turned the screen further, revealing a scanned document. According to the breeder records, this puppy's sire was a military working dog named Rex, the man finished hoarsely, the name torn from his throat like a confession. The room spun violently. It couldn't be. Rex had died years before Sarah. Unless... The missing pieces clicked together with terrifying clarity. Sarah had mentioned Rex being sent to a special breeding program before his final deployment. The military sometimes preserve the lines of exceptional working dogs, but for this puppy to exist now, with Sarah's name on his chip, a loud bang startled them all as the clinic door flew open. A disheveled woman in her late 30s burst in, her wild eyes locking onto the puppy. "Thank God you found him," she gasped, rushing forward. The man instinctively stepped between her and the table, his body thrumming with sudden tension. Something was wrong. The woman's gaze darted nervously between them, her hands twisting in her stained sweatshirt. "I've been looking everywhere for Max. He got out of my yard and—" "That's not Max," the vet interrupted coldly, holding up the scanner. "This microchip says his name is Valor." The color drained from the woman's face. The man saw it then, the flicker of panic in her eyes, the too quick recovery as she forced a laugh. "Oh, right. We, renamed him when we got him from the shelter." Her voice trailed off as the man took a deliberate step toward her, his 6'3" frame radiating controlled fury. "You left him to die on that bridge," he said softly, each word a blade. The woman stumbled back, her facade crumbling. I couldn't." She looked frantically toward the exit, but the vet had already picked up the phone. "I think you should stay until the police get here," he said calmly. As the woman began sobbing excuses, the man turned back to the puppy, to Valor. The little dog's breathing had stabilized slightly, his golden eyes half open and fixed unwaveringly on the man's face, as if he alone held the answers to some unasked question. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out the only thing he carried from his old life, a faded photograph of Sarah holding a young Rex. The resemblance was unmistakable. His throat tightened as the impossible truth settled over him. This puppy was Rex's direct descendant, and Sarah's name on the chip. That could only mean one thing. She had arranged for this before she died. A final gift, a reason to keep living. The police station's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as the man sat stiffly in a hard plastic chair, his military-trained posture never wavering despite the exhaustion weighing on his bones. Through the one-way interrogation room glass, he could see the woman from the clinic, Lisa, they'd said her name was, gesturing wildly to two officers, her face contorted in a mix of fear and defiance. The lead detective, a grizzled man with sharp eyes that missed nothing, slid a file across the table toward him. "You were right to be suspicious," the detective said, tapping a photo of the microchip documentation. "This woman's part of a ring that's been stealing high-value working dog puppies and reselling them on the black market. Military bloodlines fetch thousands on the underground circuit." The words landed like punches to the gut. The man's hands curled into fists on the table, his mind reeling with the implications. Valor, this tiny broken puppy fighting for his life, wasn't just some random stray. He was stolen property, military property, Sarah's last gift to him. The detective continued, unaware of the storm raging inside him. Here's where it gets strange. He flipped open another file, revealing veterinary records from 3 states away. This litter was specifically bred from retired MWD Rex's frozen semen, special permission granted to Sergeant Sarah Calloway 5 years ago under a classified military breeding program. The man's breath caught painfully in his chest. Sarah had never told him. Why would she keep this secret? The detective's next words sent ice through his veins. The paperwork shows she arranged for one puppy from this litter to be held until... He hesitated, glancing up with uncharacteristic sympathy. "Until after her passing, for you." A roaring filled the man's ears as the pieces clicked together with brutal clarity. Sarah had known the risks of that last deployment, known she might not come home, and she'd planned for this, for him, with the same meticulous care she'd put into every mission. His vision blurred as he stared at the documents, seeing not just ink on paper, but Sarah's familiar handwriting in the margins, her looping S's, and precise numbers in the medical charts. The detective gave him a moment before sliding over one last item, a sealed envelope yellowed with age. "We found this in the evidence locker with the breeder files. It's addressed to you." The man's hand shook as he took the envelope, Sarah's name flashing through his mind like a ghost. 5 years. 5 years he'd spent drowning in grief and guilt, pushing away everyone who tried to help, convincing himself he didn't deserve to move on. And all this time Sarah had left him this final mission. His fingers traced the familiar handwriting on the envelope, the paper slightly rough under his touch. He could almost hear her voice whispering in his ear, that soft lilt she used when she knew he was being stubborn. The detective discreetly stepped out, giving him privacy as he carefully peeled open the envelope. Inside were 2 items, a letter and a small silver key. The letter began with words that shattered what remained of his defenses. "If you're reading this, I'm not there to nag you about eating properly anymore." A wet laugh escaped him, his thumb brushing over the smudged ink where a tear had fallen. Sarah's or his, he couldn't tell. Her words unfolded like a road map, detailing how she'd arranged for Rex's lineage to continue, how she'd known he'd need something to care for when she was gone. "Valor isn't just a puppy," she wrote. "He's your new partner. Train him like we trained Rex. Love him like we loved each other. And for God's sake, Jake, stop blaming yourself for what happened to me." The key, she explained, opened a safety deposit box containing Rex's original training manuals, his service records, and, most heartbreaking of all, a series of letters she'd written for every milestone she'd miss: Jake's birthday, their anniversary, the day Valor would, hopefully, earn his own service vest. The man, Jake, finally let the tears fall, his broad shoulders shaking silently as 5 years of pent-up grief poured out. He'd thought losing Sarah was the end of his story, but she, even in death, had given him a new chapter. A sharp knock at the door startled him. The detective re-entered, his expression grim. "We've got a problem. That woman's lawyer just arrived, and they're claiming you stole the dog from them." Jake's head snapped up, his military instincts kicking in. "That's bullshit," he growled, Sarah's letter still clutched in his hand. The detective nodded. "I know, but here's the kicker. They're producing forged adoption papers showing Valor was legally transferred to them 3 weeks ago." Jake shot to his feet, the chair screeching back. Every muscle in his body tensed for a fight. There was no way in hell he was losing Valor now, not after everything. The detective held up a hand. "Before you go full Marine on someone, there might be another way." He opened his folder one last time, revealing a document Jake hadn't seen before. A military ID chip registry update signed by Sarah just days before her final deployment. It listed Jake as Valor's sole legal guardian in the event of her death. The lawyer wouldn't know about this. The forgers couldn't have copied what they didn't know existed. Jake's breath came fast as hope flared in his chest. This was it, the proof he needed. But as he reached for the document, the detective's radio crackled to life with an urgent message from the vet clinic. "We've got a situation here. The puppy's crashing." In the sudden silence of the moving vehicle, Valor whimpered softly, his nose pressing against Jake's neck as if seeking reassurance. The detective glanced back, his face grim. "You've got about 30 seconds to explain why a Pentagon Black Ops team just raided a veterinary clinic for that puppy. he demanded. But Jake was staring at Valor's x-rays again, his blood running cold as he finally understood. The shadow near the spine wasn't just a data vault. The shape was all wrong. It looked more like a key to something much bigger than a safety deposit box. The vet clinic's emergency lights cast an eerie blue glow as Jake sprinted through the sliding doors, his combat boots skidding on the polished floor. The scene before him froze the blood in his veins. Valor lay motionless on the surgical table, surrounded by a whirlwind of medical staff. Monitors screamed with frantic beeps, the ECG line spiking erratically like a mountain range gone mad. Dr. Bennett, his surgical mask now splattered with blood, barked orders to his team while simultaneously performing chest compressions on the tiny body. "We're losing him," a nurse shouted, her voice cracking with panic. Jake's vision tunneled until all he could see was Valor's small chest failing to rise, the once bright golden eyes now half-lidded and dull. Without thinking, he surged forward, his military training overriding all rational thought. "Let me in there," he demanded, his voice a graveled command that brooked no argument. The staff parted instinctively as he reached the table, his large hands hovering over the fragile puppy. Then something inexplicable happened. As Jake's fingers brushed Valor's fur, the puppy's entire body jerked violently. The heart monitor flatlined for one terrifying second before exploding back to life with a strong, steady rhythm. The vet team gasped collectively as Valor drew in a shuddering breath, his paws twitching as if chasing dreams. Dr. Bennett's eyes widened behind his glasses. "What the hell just—" he began. But Jake was already speaking, his voice barely above a whisper. "Stay with me, soldier," he murmured, his thumb stroking the ridge between Valor's eyes exactly where Sarah used to stroke Rex. "Your mission's not over yet." The words seemed to reach something deep within the puppy. Valor's tail gave a weak thump against the table, his eyes blinking open to lock onto Jake's face with startling clarity. The vet stepped back, removing his gloves with a snap. "I don't believe in miracles," he said slowly. "But that's the second time today this dog has responded to you when he shouldn't have." He motioned Jake toward the X-ray light board, where Valor's skeletal images glowed. "See this?" He pointed to a faint shadow near the puppy's spine. "That's not just trauma from the fall. This puppy was implanted with something." Jake's stomach dropped. The vet continued, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. "I thought it was a microchip at first, but the scanner couldn't read it. Then I checked the military database." He tapped a few keys on the computer, pulling up a restricted access file that made Jake's breath catch. It bore the seal of Sarah's old unit. "This isn't just any tracking device. It's a next-gen data vault used by military working dogs, and according to these records, Valor here was specially bred to carry it." Jake's mind raced. Sarah had been part of an experimental K9 cyber unit before her death. Dogs trained to transport secure data across hostile territory when electronic transfers were too risky. But why would she? The answer hit him like a bullet. The safety deposit box key, the letters. This wasn't just about giving him companionship after her death. Sarah had left him a mission, a dangerous one. His thoughts shattered as the clinic's front window exploded inward. Glass rained down as masked figures poured through the broken frame, their movements too coordinated to be ordinary criminals. Jake reacted on pure instinct, his body shielding Valor as he grabbed a surgical scalpel from the tray. "Get down!" he roared at the staff, just as the first gunshot rang out. The bullet embedded itself in the wall, where his head had been seconds before. These weren't puppy thieves. They were professionals. And they weren't here for the dog. They were here for whatever was inside him. Valor, as if sensing the danger, struggled to stand on wobbly legs, a low growl building in his small chest despite his injuries. Jake made a split-second decision. He snatched a blanket from the warmer and bundled Valor against his chest with one arm, while grabbing a fire extinguisher with the other. "Back door," he shouted to the vet. As the intruders advanced, Jake yanked the extinguisher's pin and sprayed a thick cloud of white chemical fog across the room. In the chaos, he and Dr. Bennett bolted for the rear exit. Valor clutched tightly against Jake's pounding heart. They burst into the alley behind the clinic just as another vehicle screeched to a halt, a black SUV with tinted windows. Jake braced for another attack, but the window rolled down to reveal the detective from earlier. "Get in!" he yelled. No explanations. No time to question. Jake dove into the back seat just as more gunfire erupted from the clinic. The SUV peeled away with a scream of tires, leaving their pursuers in a cloud of exhaust. In the sudden silence of the moving vehicle, Valor whimpered softly, his nose pressing against Jake's neck as if seeking reassurance. The detective glanced back, his face grim. "You've got about 30 seconds to explain why a Pentagon Black Ops team just raided a veterinary clinic for that puppy," he demanded. But Jake was staring at Valor's x-rays again, his blood running cold as he finally understood. The shadow near the spine wasn't just a data vault. The shape was all wrong. It looked more like a key to something much bigger than a safety deposit box. The SUV careened through back alleys, tires screeching against pavement as the detective wove through traffic with practiced precision. Jake cradled Valor against his chest, the puppy's rapid heartbeat thrumming against his palm like a tiny drum. The detective's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Talk fast, Calloway," he snapped. "Why is a military cyber unit after a damn puppy?" Jake's mind raced, his fingers absently tracing the ridge along Valor's spine where the implant lay hidden. The answer was in Sarah's letter, in the words he hadn't fully understood until now. "Train him like we trained Rex. Love him like we loved each other." This was never just about companionship. Sarah had given him a mission, a final mission. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the safety deposit box key, holding it up so the detective could see. "This opens something at First National Bank," Jake said, his voice low and urgent. "My wife left it for me. But I think what they really want..." His hand moved back to Valor's small body. "I think it's in him." The detective's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, his jaw tightening. "Christ, you're telling me that puppy's some kind of furry flash drive?" Before Jake could respond, Valor suddenly stiffened in his arms, letting out a sharp yip of distress. The puppy's nose twitched wildly, his ears swiveling toward the front of the vehicle. Jake knew that alert posture. Rex had done the same thing seconds before detecting IEDs. "Stop the car," he bellowed. The detective slammed the brakes just as a deafening explosion rocked the street ahead. A fireball mushroomed into the night sky where their route would have taken them. The force of the blast rattled the SUV's windows, showering them with debris. Valor trembled violently in Jake's arms, his high-pitched whines piercing the sudden silence. The detective swore viciously, throwing the vehicle into reverse. "They're hurting us," he growled. Jake didn't need to ask who they were. The precision of the ambush, the military-grade explosives. This went far beyond puppy thieves. Someone had activated a full-scale operation to eliminate them. As the SUV sped down a side street, Jake noticed Valor pawing insistently at his jacket pocket where Sarah's letter rested. The puppy's behavior was too deliberate, too focused to ignore. Jake fished out the crumpled paper, and Valor immediately quieted. his wet nose pressing against a specific paragraph near the bottom. Jake's breath caught as he reread the words he'd initially overlooked. Rex's old commands still work. Use them when you're ready. His mind flashed to Rex's specialized training, the covert signals Sarah had developed for high-risk extractions. If Valor had been bred and trained from Rex's line. A bullet shattered the rear window, spraying glass across the back seat. Jake instinctively curled his body around Valor as the detective swerved violently. "They're on us," the detective shouted. Jake made a decision. He lifted Valor until they were eye to eye, the puppy's gaze startlingly intelligent despite his pain and fear. "Schutzhund," Jake commanded, using Rex's old activation code. The effect was instantaneous. Valor's ears pricked forward, his entire body tensing with focused energy. Jake quickly followed with another command, one Sarah had used during their darkest missions. Shatten Protocol. Shadow Protocol. Valor twisted in Jake's grip, his small teeth grabbing the edge of Sarah's letter and tearing it cleanly in half. Hidden within the paper's fibers was a thin metallic strip that glinted under the streetlights flashing by. The puppy dropped it into Jake's palm, a miniature decoder chip Jake recognized from Sarah's Black Ops days. The detective's eyes widened. "What the hell is that?" Jake's fingers closed around the chip just as their pursuers rammed the SUV from behind. The impact sent them careening toward a concrete barrier. Time seemed to slow as Jake's training kicked in. He wrapped both arms around Valor, bracing for impact. The crash never came. At the last possible second, a garage door slid open beside them, and the detective wrenched the wheel, sending them skidding into a hidden underground tunnel. The door slammed shut behind them, cutting off their pursuers. The sudden darkness was broken only by flickering emergency lights as the SUV coasted to a stop. The detective turned in his seat, his face pale. "This tunnel's been abandoned for years. How did you—" "Not me," Jake interrupted, staring at Valor. The puppy panted heavily but looked oddly satisfied, his tail giving a single wag. Sarah hadn't just implanted data in Valor. She'd given him the ability to access secure locations, likely through some advanced biometric trigger Jake didn't yet understand. The decoder chip in his palm began emitting a soft pulse, casting eerie blue shadows across the tunnel walls. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, a mechanical hum started up. Lights flickered on one by one, revealing a hidden bunker straight out of Sarah's Spec Ops days. Jake's throat tightened. This was one of her safe houses, one even he hadn't known about. The detective looked ready to have a coronary. "Calloway, what kind of mess did your wife leave you in?" Jake had no answer. Because as the final lights illuminated the far wall, a massive screen activated automatically, displaying a classified military seal followed by 3 words that turned his blood to ice. Operation Phoenix Bird. Active. And beneath it, a live countdown clock ticking relentlessly toward 0. The bunker's sterile white lights hummed to life, revealing a high-tech command center that looked like it belonged in a military war room rather than beneath derelict city streets. Computer banks lined the walls, their monitors flickering to life with classified encryption codes Jake recognized from Sarah's most sensitive missions. Valor squirmed in his arms, letting out an eager whine as his nose twitched toward the central console, almost as if he recognized the place. The detective stumbled out of the SUV, his service weapon drawn as he spun in a slow circle, taking in the impossible facility. What in the actual hell? His voice trailed off as the largest screen at the front of the room illuminated with a familiar face that made Jake's knees nearly buckle. Sarah. Not the grief-faded memory he carried, but vivid, alive, her piercing hazel eyes staring directly through the screen as if she could see them standing there 5 years after her death. She wore her military fatigues, her dark hair pulled back in the no-nonsense ponytail she'd favored during deployments. The timestamp in the corner showed the recording was made 3 days before the explosion that killed her. "If you're seeing this, Jake," her recorded voice echoed through the bunker's speakers, "it means Valor found you and Operation Phoenix Bird is active." Her image flickered as she turned slightly, typing something off-screen. "There's no easy way to say this. My death wasn't an accident, and the people responsible are about to activate a weapon that makes every past threat look like firecrackers." Jake's hands tightened around Valor until the puppy yelped softly, bringing him back to the present. The detective looked ready to vomit. "Calloway, what the fuck did your wife get mixed up in?" Jake could only shake his head mutely as Sarah's recording continued. "We discovered a Black Ops program called Houndstooth, a neural targeting system using military working dogs as carriers." The screen split, showing schematics of cyber-enhanced German shepherds. They engineered a way to implant behavioral triggers in the dog's DNA, creating perfect sleeper agents. Jake's blood turned to ice as the implications hit him. Valor wasn't just carrying data, he was part of the weapon system itself. Sarah's face hardened on screen. "I sabotaged the program, but not before they created 12 prototype carriers." A grid of puppy photos appeared, 11 with red X's over them. Only one remained unmarked: Valor. "They've been eliminating the others as they activate the system. Valor's the last. He's also the key to stopping it." The recording glitched suddenly, Sarah's image distorting as alarms blared in the background of the years-old footage. "They're coming for me," she said urgently. "Remember Rex's final command sequence? Valor knows it too. Use it when the timer hits 0. The screen went black for one terrifying second before flashing up a new image, a map of the city with 12 pulsing red dots. 11 were stationary at military bases. The 12th moved erratically near the river, right where Jake had found Valor. The detective made a strangled noise. "Those dots? Are those the dogs?" Jake nodded numbly, his combat-honed mind already connecting the horrifying dots. The stationary dots were activated weapons. The moving one, Valor, was still dormant. "For now," Sarah's voice returned, quieter this time. "The triggers transmit through micro-vibrations only dogs can hear. Once activated, the carriers will converge on predetermined targets and—" She hesitated, something like grief flashing across her face. "Let's just say it won't be pretty. You've got until midnight to input the termination code." The screen changed again, showing a complex cipher that made Jake's stomach drop. It was based on their wedding song's musical notes. Sarah's final words cut off as the recording ended abruptly. "I love, ya—" Silence. Then, from somewhere above them, a deep, resonant hum shook dust from the ceiling. Valor barked sharply, his entire body vibrating with tension. The detective backed toward the SUV. "We need to call in reinforcements. This is way above our pay grade." Jake grabbed his arm. "No outside calls. If this leaks, they'll kill Valor before we can stop this." He looked down at the puppy, who stared back with uncanny understanding. Sarah had prepared Valor for this moment, trained him in utero using next-gen bonding techniques Jake had only heard whispers about. The countdown clock on the main screen now showed 4:37:22, less than 5 hours to midnight. Jake moved to the central console, Valor cradled in one arm as he typed frantically with his free hand. The system asked for biometric verification. Before he could react, Valor wriggled free and placed one small paw directly on the scanner. The machine beeped acceptance. "Jesus Christ," the detective breathed. The console unfolded like something from a sci-fi movie, revealing a cylindrical port exactly the size of the decoder chip Valor had uncovered. Jake inserted it with trembling fingers. The entire bunker shuddered as the system booted up fully, displaying a 3D holographic map of the city. The 11 red dots now pulsed in sync with the ominous hum from above. But it was the new 12th marker that stopped Jake's heart, a blue dot blinking at their current location. Valor's dot. Only it wasn't labeled Valor. The screen read, Primary Neural Override, awaiting command sequence. The detective backed away, his weapon now trained on Valor. Calloway, that's not a dog, that's a goddamn weapon system with fur. Jake stepped between them, his mind reeling. Sarah hadn't just given him a companion. She'd entrusted him with the only key to stopping an attack that could decimate the city. And the timer was still ticking. Somewhere above them the hum intensified, the walls vibrated, and Valor. Valor sat perfectly still, his intelligent eyes locked on Jake's, waiting for the command that would decide everything. The bunker's lights flickered violently as the humming from above ground intensified, rattling equipment and sending loose cables swaying like sinister snakes. Valor's entire body suddenly stiffened in Jake's arms, his muscles locking up as his golden eyes glazed over with an unnatural milky film. A thin trail of saliva dripped from his clenched jaws, his tiny paws twitching in rhythmic spasms that matched the pulsing red dots on the holographic map. The detective backed away, his service weapon now trained squarely on the seizing puppy. "It's happening," he whispered hoarsely. "The activation signal, it's turning him into one of them." Jake clutched Valor tighter, feeling the puppy's racing heartbeat thundering against his own chest. This wasn't just a seizure. This was programming taking hold. Somewhere out there, a master signal was rewriting Valor's neural pathways, turning Sarah's final gift into a weapon of mass destruction. The holographic map zoomed in abruptly, revealing horrifying details Jake had missed before. Each red dot now displayed a percentage counter: 89%, 92%, 94%, climbing steadily toward full activation. The 11th dot, stationed at the military base where Sarah had died, flashed a blood-red 100%. The screen split to show live security footage from that location. A fully grown German Shepherd, one of the original 12 carriers, stood rigidly at attention in a kennel, its eyes reflecting the same milky haze now clouding Valor's. Then, without warning, the dog moved. Not with animalistic randomness, but with chilling mechanical precision. It pressed its nose against the kennel lock in an exact sequence. The heavy steel door clicked open. Jake's blood ran cold. The detective's gun hand trembled. "We have to put him down, Calloway." Before he does, whatever the hell that was, Jake barely heard him. His entire world had narrowed to Valor's struggling form, and Sarah's last words echoing in his mind. Remember Rex's final command sequence. The bunker's computer suddenly blared an alarm. The countdown clock now showed 3:17:49, the numbers accelerating unnaturally fast. Time was running out faster than expected. Jake made his decision. He grabbed the detective's wrist, forcing the gun downward. "Sarah embedded a kill switch," he said through gritted teeth. "But I need Valor conscious to activate it." As if on cue, Valor let out a pained yowl, his back arching violently. The milky film over his eyes thickened, his movements becoming more purposeful, more dangerous. His tiny teeth snapped toward Jake's hand with uncharacteristic aggression, drawing blood. The detective raised his weapon again. "He's turning, Calloway. We're out of time." Jake ignored the sting, ignoring the blood, ignoring everything except the faintest flicker of gold still visible beneath the haze in Valor's eyes. The real Valor, Sarah's Valor, was still in there, fighting. With one fluid motion, Jake grabbed the decoder chip from the console and pressed it against Valor's heaving side, right over the implant. Then he leaned down until his lips brushed the puppy's twitching ear and whispered 2 words in the precise cadence Sarah had always used with Rex. Auf Wiedersehen, Schatz. Goodbye, sweetheart. The effect was instantaneous. Valor's entire body convulsed once, then went limp. For one heart-stopping second, Jake thought he'd killed him. Then the puppy drew in a shuddering breath, and the milky haze receded just enough to reveal familiar golden irises swimming with confusion and pain. The holographic map flickered wildly as Valor's blue dot began pulsing faster, not in sync with the red ones anymore, but against them. A new prompt appeared on the main screen. Primary. Override engaged. Upload termination code. Jake exhaled sharply. Phase 1 worked. Valor was fighting the programming. But the real test came next. He carried the puppy to the console where a keyboard had emerged from its surface. The prompt waited expectantly. Jake knew what it wanted, the cipher based on their wedding song. But which song? They'd joked about 3 possibilities before settling on one at the last minute. His mind raced. The first dance? No, that was just for show. The song she'd hummed while Valor's sudden growl cut off his thoughts. The puppy was staring fixedly at a seemingly random key on the keyboard, the letter J. Then his paw twitched toward the number 5. Understanding dawned. Sarah hadn't just trained Valor to carry data, she'd trained him to help input it. Jake placed Valor carefully on the console, letting the puppy's paws rest on the keys. "Show me, boy," he murmured. What followed was the most surreal experience of Jake's life. Valor began pressing keys in a complex sequence, his movements sometimes hesitant as he fought against the programming still trying to reclaim him. The detective watched in stunned silence as numbers, letters, and symbols appeared on screen, none making sense individually, but together forming a perfect encryption key. The countdown clock froze at 2:59:59. The red dot's percentages stuttered. Then everything went wrong. A deafening explosion rocked the bunker, sending Jake sprawling as the ceiling rained concrete dust. The detective shouted a warning as the holographic map dissolved into static. Through the chaos, Jake saw Valor's body lock up again, the milky haze returning with terrifying speed. The screen flashed a brutal message. Remote override detected. Primary carrier engaging countermeasures. The red dot's percentages jumped to 99% in unison. The 11th dot's feed showed its German Shepherd bursting into what looked like a military server room, soldiers collapsing around it without any visible attack. Jake's stomach dropped. Neural weapons didn't need bombs. They hijacked nervous systems. And Valor, still partially under his control, was now caught in a digital tug-of-war between Sarah's programming and the enemy's override. The detective dragged Jake behind the SUV as another explosion shook the facility. "They're above us," he yelled over the chaos. "They know we're trying to stop it." Jake clutched Valor close, feeling the puppy's body burning up with fever. They were out of time, out of options, except... Jake looked down at Valor's clouded eyes, at the faintest spark of gold still fighting to shine through. Sarah hadn't just given him a weapon. She'd given him a partner, and partners didn't let each other fight alone. He made his choice. Grabbing the decoder chip, Jake did the unthinkable. He pressed it directly against Valor's implant and spoke the words Sarah had used to activate Rex's most dangerous protocol. "Lose den Sturm," release the storm. Valor's eyes flew wide open, both golden now, blazing with unnatural intensity. The holographic map exploded with light as every red dot simultaneously flared, then winked out. The countdown clock shattered into pixels, and from above came an ear-splitting screech of feedback as the activation signal abruptly died. Silence. Then Valor collapsed, his small body going terrifyingly still. The silence in the bunker was deafening after the explosion stopped, broken only by Jake's ragged breathing as he cradled Valor's motionless body. The puppy's golden fur was damp with sweat, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven bursts. The detective slowly lowered his weapon, his face ashen as he stared at the now dark holographic screens. Did we just stop a terrorist attack with a puppy? He whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. Jake didn't answer. His entire focus was on the tiny heartbeat fluttering beneath his fingers, on the way Valor's eyelids twitched as if fighting to open. The decoder chip had fallen to the floor during the chaos, its blue light now dim and erratic. Jake reached for it instinctively, but the moment his fingers brushed the surface, the chip disintegrated into a fine metallic powder. Its purpose served. A soft chime from the console made them both jump. The main screen flickered back to life, displaying a new message in Sarah's familiar coding font. Protocol, Phoenix complete. Primary carrier secure. Beneath it, a progress bar loaded slowly until it reached 100%, followed by a series of files auto-decrypting before their eyes. The detective sucked in a sharp breath as the first document opened, a classified military report detailing the true scope of Operation Houndstooth. Jake scanned the text with growing horror. The neural targeting system wasn't just designed to hijack dogs. It was a prototype for something far worse, a way to weaponize any mammal's nervous system by piggybacking on ancient predatory instincts buried in their DNA. The 11 activated carriers had been a test run. The real targets were the thousands of military working dogs stationed across the country. Valor whimpered suddenly, his paws twitching in a way that made Jake's breath catch. The puppy's eyes opened fully at last, clear and gold and painfully aware. But something was different. The intelligence shining in them was deeper, more focused than any dog's gaze Jake had ever seen. Valor turned his head laboriously toward the console, his nose twitching at the keyboard. Understanding flashed through Jake. Sarah hadn't just implanted data in Valor. She'd given him the ability to access it, to think in ways no ordinary dog could. The files continued unfolding, revealing the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. Valor wasn't just a carrier, he was the cure. His DNA contained a counter-agent that could permanently disable Houndstooth's programming, but extracting it would require sacrificing the very thing that made Valor unique, his enhanced neural pathways. The detective exhaled shakily. So, what now? We take him to some lab and... He trailed off, unable to voice the unspeakable. Jake's arms tightened around Valor instinctively. The puppy licked his hand once, weakly, as if to say it was okay, but it wasn't. Jake had already lost Sarah to this nightmare. He couldn't lose Valor too. The console beeped again, drawing their attention to a newly unlocked video file. Jake pressed play with trembling fingers. Sarah appeared on screen, but this time she wasn't in uniform. She sat cross-legged on their old living room rug, her hair loose around her shoulders the way Jake remembered best. Behind her, a much younger Rex dozed contentedly. The timestamp showed this was recorded just hours before her final deployment. "Hey, Marine," she said softly, her smile tinged with sadness. "If you're seeing this, it means Valor found you, and you've stopped the immediate threat." Her fingers absently stroked Rex's fur as she spoke. I know what the files say about the counter-agent. But there's another way. The camera panned slightly to reveal a small device on the coffee table, a neural sync module Jake recognized from their Black Ops days. The prototype can transfer the counter-agent coding to another compatible neural network, Sarah continued, like, say, a human who shares enough genetic markers with the original donor. Jake's blood turned to ice. Original donor, the pieces clicked together with terrible clarity. Valor wasn't just bred from Rex's line. His enhanced DNA came from another source, too. Sarah's. The video continued, Sarah's voice growing firmer. The transfer would be temporary, just long enough to synthesize the counteragent in bulk, but it would mean carrying Valor's programming in your own mind for a while. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. I know you, Jake. You'll say yes, so I'm begging you. Wait until Valor is strong enough to help you through it. You'll need his guidance to... The video cut off abruptly, replaced by a schematic showing the sync process. The risks listed made Jake's stomach churn. Memory loss, personality fragmentation, permanent neural damage. Valor stirred in his arms, letting out a small, determined bark. His eyes locked onto Jake's with startling intensity. The message was clear. He was ready. Jake swallowed hard, his mind racing. This wasn't just about saving other dogs now. If Houndstooth could work on canines, how long before someone adapted it for humans? The detective was already shaking his head. Calloway, you can't seriously be considering... A new alert blared from the console, cutting him off. External. Security feeds showed black SUVs converging on the tunnel entrance. They were out of time. Jake looked down at Valor, at the trust shining in those golden eyes, and made his decision. How long to set up the sync? He asked the detective grimly. Somewhere above them, the first armored boots hit the pavement. The neural sync module hummed to life with a sound like distant thunder, its electrodes glinting ominously under the bunker's harsh lights. Jake sat rigid in the command chair, his shirt peeled open to expose the pale scar tissue from old shrapnel wounds as the detective fumbled with the adhesive pads. Valor lay curled in his lap, his small body still weak from the earlier ordeal, but his eyes alert and focused. The approaching footsteps from the tunnel above grew louder, rhythmic, methodical. Military. Jake's fingers tightened around the puppy's fur. This is insane, the detective muttered, his hand shaking as he adjusted the final connection. We don't even know if this damn thing works. The console screen flashed a warning. Neural bridge initializing. 60% compatibility detected. 60%. Jake exhaled sharply. Sarah's genes mixed with his own shared history, just enough to attempt the transfer. Barely. Valor suddenly lifted his head, his wet nose pressing against Jake's wrist in urgent warning. The puppy's ears swiveled toward the bunker's ventilation shaft, a sound too high-pitched for human ears. They were inside the walls now. Jake met the detective's panicked gaze. When I say go, he whispered, hit the switch and get clear. The older man opened his mouth to protest, but a metallic clang from the corridor cut him off. No more time. Jake gripped Valor tighter and nodded. The detective slammed the activation switch just as the bunker door exploded inward. White-hot lightning seared through Jake's nervous system. His back arched violently as the sync module flared bright blue, his vision dissolving into fractured images that weren't his own. A sterile lab, Sarah's face drawn with exhaustion as she cradled a newborn Valor, whispering, "You have to find him," before injecting something into the puppy's neck. The scenes shifted with dizzying speed, classified documents being shredded, Sarah sprinting down a rain-slicked street with Valor clutched to her chest. Then, gunfire. Jake gasped as the memory engulfed him. Not the sanitized official report, but the brutal truth. Sarah hadn't died from an IED. She'd been executed. Cornered in an alley with Valor hidden beneath her jacket, her last act shielding the puppy with her body as the bullets tore through her. The killers had missed Valor curled beneath her ribs, his tiny body soaked in her blood but alive. Alive because Sarah had... The sync module shrieked a warning, yanking Jake back to the present, his mouth filled with the coppery taste of blood as the system overloaded, the connection fracturing, but not before one final image seared into his brain. A face. The man who'd given the kill order. A high-ranking officer Jake had served under. A man currently overseeing the Houndstooth program. Reality crashed back as armed figures swarmed the room. The detective was on his knees, hands raised. Valor had rolled onto his side, panting heavily, but his eyes were clear. The sync had worked. Partially. Jake could feel it. Foreign knowledge humming at the edges of his consciousness. The counteragent coding now woven through his own neural pathways like invisible thread. A black-clad soldier yanked him upright, slamming him against the console. "Where's the dog?" the man snarled. Jake's vision swam, his body still racked with sync aftershocks. He forced a bloody smile. "Which one?" The soldier reared back to strike, then froze as an unearthly howl echoed through the bunker. Not from Valor, from above. The sound multiplied, a chorus of agonized canine cries that made even the hardened operatives flinch. The console screen flickered to life on its own, displaying security feeds from across the city. Every military kennel, every police K-9 unit, even civilian homes, German shepherds everywhere were collapsing, seizing, their bodies rejecting the Houndstooth programming as Jake's borrowed counteragent code propagated through the network. The lead soldier paled. "What did you do?" Jake spat blood onto the floor. "Finished my wife's mission." Then Valor moved. Fast as a striking snake, the puppy lunged for the console, his small paws dancing across the keyboard with uncanny precision. The soldiers shouted, too slow to react as the bunker's emergency protocols engaged with a bone-shaking thrum. Blast doors slammed shut, locking them all inside. The lights cut out, replaced by pulsing red emergency beacons. And from the speakers, Sarah's voice rang out. Not a recording this time, but an AI echo she'd left buried in the system. "Authorization code Phoenix," the voice commanded. The soldiers hesitated, confused. Jake didn't. He spoke through gritted teeth. "Off. Wiedersehen, Schatz." The response was instantaneous. Sprinklers activated along the ceiling, spraying a fine mist that made the soldiers cough and stagger. Non-lethal neural inhibitors, Sarah's last line of defense. Within seconds, the armed men dropped like marionettes with cut strings. Only the detective remained standing, gaping at the carnage. Valor limped to Jake's side, his tail wagging weakly. The console displayed one final message. "Counter-agent synthesis complete. Uploading to mainframe." The detective helped Jake to his feet. "What now?" he asked hoarsely. Jake looked down at Valor, at the knowing glint in those golden eyes. The puppy barked once, sharp and clear, then trotted toward the bunker's hidden rear exit, pausing to glance back expectantly. Jake understood. This wasn't over. The man who'd ordered Sarah's death was still out there, and thanks to the sync, Jake now carried proof. As they followed Valor into the dark tunnel, the puppy's gait grew steadier with each step. Jake's head throbbed with residual pain, but beneath it, something else hummed. A strange new awareness, as if part of Valor's consciousness had stayed with him. The detective eyed them both warily. You realize we're now fugitives with a genetically enhanced puppy, right? Jake's lips curved in the first real smile he'd managed in years. Marines don't quit, he said, ruffling Valor's ears. And neither do German shepherds. Somewhere ahead, a faint light glimmered, the promise of answers, of justice, of a future Jake had thought lost forever. Valor's nose twitched as he caught a scent on the stale air, his tail wagging faster. Jake recognized that look. It was the same one Rex used to get right before finding something important. The hunt was just beginning. The tunnel led them to an abandoned subway station, its crumbling walls covered in decades of graffiti. Moonlight streamed through broken ceiling tiles, painting silver streaks across the tracks as Valor trotted ahead with surprising confidence, his nose working overtime. Jake moved carefully, his body still aching from the neural sync, his mind buzzing with the remnants of Valor's memories that now lived inside him. The detective followed close behind, his breathing shallow with nerves. "This pup better know where he's going," he muttered, flinching as a rat scurried past. Valor ignored him, his ears pricking forward as they reached a rusted maintenance door marked with faded military insignia. The puppy scratched at it insistently, then looked back at Jake with those uncanny golden eyes that held generations of canine intelligence and something deeper, something profoundly human. Jake didn't hesitate. He kicked the door open, revealing a hidden elevator that shouldn't have existed in this derelict place. The detective grabbed his arm. "This is a goddamn trap." Jake shook him off. "No," he said quietly. "It's her final move." The elevator descended smoothly, the numbers counting down to a sub-level not listed on any official blueprint. When the doors slid open, they revealed a sterile white lab that took Jake's breath away. Not because of the advanced equipment, but because of the framed photo on the far wall. Sarah and Rex grinning on their wedding day. This was her private research facility, her true life's work. Valor bounded forward, his nails clicking on the polished floor as he made straight for a specific terminal. The screen flickered on automatically, displaying a message. "Welcome home, Jake." The detective made a strangled noise. How the hell? But Jake was already moving, his fingers flying over the keyboard as a half-remembered password surfaced from the sync's residual memories. Files unlocked one after another, revealing Sarah's true mission, not just to stop Houndstooth, but to create something better. Valor rubbed against Jake's leg, his warm body a steady presence as the final video played. Sarah appeared, her face drawn but determined. "If you're seeing this, the counter-agent worked," she said, her voice echoing in the empty lab. But Phoenix was never just about destruction. It was about evolution. The screen split to show schematics of Valor's unique neural architecture. A perfect fusion of canine loyalty and human-like reasoning, designed not as a weapon, but as a bridge between species. "I used my own neural patterns as the template," Sarah admitted, her hand resting briefly on her stomach in a gesture Jake recognized instantly. The timeline clicked into place. She'd been pregnant when she died. The knowledge hit him like a physical blow, his knees buckling as Valor pressed closer, whining softly. The video continued. "Valor isn't just Rex's descendant. He carries pieces of us both. My memories, your resilience. Raise him well, Jake. Love him like we loved each other." The screen went dark, leaving only one file remaining. A DNA test confirming what Jake already knew in his soul. Valor was family in every way that mattered. The detective cleared his throat awkwardly. "So, what now?" Jake looked down at Valor, at the intelligence shining in those golden eyes, and made his choice. He grabbed the research drive, crushed the lab's mainframe with a fire axe, and carried Valor back to the elevator. Outside, dawn painted the sky in hues of rose and gold. Somewhere out there, the man who'd ordered Sarah's death would answer for his crimes. But not today. Today was for beginnings. Valor licked Jake's cheek once, his tail wagging slowly as they walked away from the ruins of the past. The puppy, no, Jake corrected himself, their son, would need training, a home, a life. And for the first time in 5 years, Jake found himself looking forward instead of back. Moral lesson: true loyalty never dies. It transcends species, time, and even death, finding ways to guide us home when we need it most. Sometimes salvation comes on 4 paws, with golden eyes that see straight into your soul, reminding you that love's echo lasts forever.